Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, if you're not satisfied with your love or sex life, I want you to know that I get how painful it is. Sometimes it's hard to know what to do to change things up and get the results you want. But having spent 20 years as a dating and relationship coach, supporting thousands of men to have the relationships and sex they want, I know it's possible for you when you get the right kind of support. As a woman coach, I bring a unique advantage by helping you understand how women think and feel and why they say and do things that can be so frustrating for you. My specialty is being able to tell within minutes why you're losing attraction, trust, or respect from women, and how to turn that around. Even though you've likely been raised to think you should be a man who doesn't need any help, it just doesn't work that way because none of us were handed a guide to love or sex. So every month by application, I open my calendar to a few men for consultations. Men are amazed to walk away from these sessions feeling more confident in and out of the bedroom. Coaching isn't for everyone. I work with men who are willing to be honest about their role in the situations they've created. So if you're still playing the blame game, this isn't for you. But if you're ready to take action and have a love and sex life you feel great about, book a time to meet with me. Go to shanajamescoaching.com/consult and fill out the form to tell me more about you so we can set something up. That's shanajamescoaching.com/consult. Enjoy today's podcast. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm your host, Shana James, and I'm excited to be here today to talk about, it's funny to feel excited about a painful topic, but I have this excitement around supporting you guys listening to break through a painful topic around the fear of rejection, around self-sabotage. So whether you are dating or whether you're in a long-term relationship, I believe that all of these, the fears, the self-sabotage, it comes up at whatever phase of relationship we're in. It doesn't go away. So thankfully, we have an amazing guest here today, David Chambers, who is a relationship dating and intimacy coach for men. Thank you so much for being here, David.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Shana.
Yeah. Can you give us a little bit of your story, how you got into this, why you got into this? Tell the
Yeah,
listeners what's up.
I'll I'll tell the bridge version. About 15, 16 years ago, I was sad about my own dating life. I was like, I'm not meeting the women I want to. I'm unhappy about that. I want to do something about that. So in those days, Google existed.
Right.
So I Googled, I read some books, then I found myself at a boot camp, a pickup boot camp, and then I
Uh-huh.
ended up working in that world for a couple of years just on the side. I was working in tech as well. So I was like a computer science degree working tech. So I was doing that on the side. I
Yep.
left that industry then because it wasn't as enjoyable and some things were going on that I didn't like the look of. And I just went on a journey of my own self-development. And then fast forward probably to about 2016, I broke up with my then girlfriend of 4.5 years, midway through traveling around the world, in Bolivia, found myself crying. Like I ruined the relationship because I wasn't expressing my needs. I wasn't saying how I
Um,
was feeling. I was making lots of assumptions about what she would get angry about if I said, and it really caused the relationship to fall apart. And I really take a lot of responsibility for that.
yeah.
And I remember lying on the bed in a hotel called the Green Hotel, and I was like, I'm not going to let that happen again. And I then really journeyed through with coaching, with self-development workshops, with group stuff and all sorts about moving through my own emotional blockages, like what was stopping me
Yeah.
emotionally, why was those things coming up, come across things like attachment theory,
Yeah.
emotional processing, breath work, meditation retreats, like I'm willing to pretty much try
Beautiful.
anything.
Yeah.
um and that led me to starting a podcast, and then that's led me to coaching again because someone asked me to coach them. And then that was about 4 or 5 years ago that person asked me to coach them, and I enjoyed it again. I was like, wow, I enjoyed it. So I kept going, and then my business now is to really coach men in the area of dating, relationship, intimacy, masculinity comes up a lot for me at the
Yeah.
men I work with. I'm really helping men deepen their capacity for deep connection, whether that be with themselves, because often it starts
That's where
there,
it
but
starts, right? Yep.
also yeah, with the women that they meet.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. I love meeting men who have gone on this deep journey of self-growth and are willing to share the vulnerability of their own lives and their own stories. And I led workshops back in the day. I started about 20 years ago, and there were a lot of men in the pickup world who would come to our workshops. And so, at that point, I had a lot of judgment around the pickup world, but I really did I started to see the seed of wisdom, and that every man who came from that world was a beautiful human who had this vulnerability and who was struggling to relate with women because we are confusing and we are frustrating, and there are lots of barriers that we all have learned to put up. So yeah, thank you for supporting men in that way and for going deep, like you said, into the emotions. I think that's a place, you guys as men didn't grow up being taught, like, let's explore this emotionally and let's see what's really going on here. It was like, suck it up and don't cry and don't be a wimp and all that bullshit.
Exactly, exactly. We don't get that schooling in the emotional landscape and our emotional bodies, like feeling like the
Yeah.
sensation of emotions and giving it words and being able to like actually express that to someone without being bullied and teased and belittled. And
Yes.
that, very quickly teaches men that their feelings don't matter, their feelings are unimportant. And actually all that does is suppress them, and cause havoc in their lives, especially
Right.
in the space of relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I've worked with a lot of men and I've dated some, and I remember actually dating a man who, this was in my maybe early 40s after my divorce. And we were dating for a couple months and he cried with me and he opened up and I was just loving him and supporting him. And then he was like, I've never had a woman love me or, support me through my tears. It's always been disgust and pushing away. So I do, I get that women aren't always used to it either. And women can be brutal in some ways. And I'm curious about this, but when I work with men, it's like I really support them to find the place in themselves where they know without a doubt. Maybe that's not fair. We all doubt it sometimes, but they know in a deep way that there's nothing wrong with feeling emotional, with feeling fear, with all of these things, so that even if a woman is judging it, they still have a like, oh, yeah, well, that's interesting, or that's too bad that you're going to judge me. I actually know that I'm good and whole and right.
Exactly, exactly. It's like it's the key for men is to develop the confidence in themselves and their
Yeah.
feelings and emotions so that they can bring those feelings and emotions to the woman they're with,
Yeah.
irrespective of the reaction. Because ultimately, for a lot of men, the fear is that stops them, not just with the emotional piece, but in many areas of life, is the reaction they're going to get from the woman.
Yeah.
Maybe they've had a story like, oh, I cried once and we broke up 3 months later, and they equate it to that. Or they cried and the woman they're with gave them a certain look, and they
Yeah.
made that look mean that she was disgusted in them.
Yep.
And there's also truth in, like I've spoken to many women, and they are quite not quite have so many women are not quite evolved to the point where they can actually hold a man's emotions,
Yeah.
that when they do
True.
receive them, part of
They
them
freak out.
reactive. Yeah, they react and
Yeah.
they shut down, and they're like, oh, they feel disgusted, they get the ick and stuff like that. So I totally understand why men would do that, but it's about finding a person who's on that wavelength that can hold that sort of emotional capacity and those that sort of emotional energy with you.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Right. Finding that person and finding it in yourself so that you aren't settling and thinking that someone who judges you, someone who shames you is actually a good choice for a partner.
Exactly.
Okay, so can we go into the self-sabotage then that happens, right? When a man isn't in that place, isn't confident in himself, what do you see happening? How do men sabotage themselves?
So I see men sabotaging themselves when they don't see themselves as attractive men, as good men or good enough. They have one of these many beliefs about their being and who they are and their
Yeah,
attractiveness. And then what they do is it's almost like they're emanating that energy constantly
yeah,
with the people they meet. And then they misinterpret all these signs that might be coming towards them. as meaning that there's confirmation of this belief they don't really want to believe about themselves. So, say for
Yeah.
instance, a man feels like he isn't a accomplished leader when it comes to creating plans and organizing things. So he's with his partner or with a date and he suggests something and she might make an amendment because the time doesn't work or she wants to go to a different place or she's vegan or something like that, and he takes that information, instead of taking that information as like her really being honest and open-hearted about what she desires, he takes that information as meaning that there's something wrong with his capacity to lead,
Yeah.
and that reinforces that belief. And then because then he's just spotting things, and then maybe he goes into like, okay, I'm not going to try and be assertive or lead because when I do that, I'm going to be rejected. So then he kind of steps into being more passive, which
Hmm.
then creates as much harm as his projections.
Right. Right. Isn't that interesting? The thing that we try to do to compensate often creates the result we don't want just as much as right, if we are to challenge ourselves and step up in that way.
Mm. Yeah, it's the power of our creative ability as human beings
Yeah.
is to really manifest what we put our attention onto.
Mm-hmm. Right. Which is a power. At first it can seem like, oh shit, that's bad news, but it's great news because as you learn to shift your attention, then you learn to create more of what you want. So, how do you help men work with that kind of self sabotage?
Yeah, so we've got to become aware of it, right? Awareness is always the first step when we're dealing with self-sabotage. Because if we're not aware of it, we're just going to make it happen and we've been completely unconscious that it's actually happening. And more so, it'll be happening and we'll blame the people we date. We'll
Yes.
go, oh, it's the women I'm meeting, or it's online dating, or it's modern dating, or whatever, but we don't take responsibility.
Yeah.
So first of all, you become aware of like, okay, I'm sabotaging things. Okay, I can see where I went on this date and this person said this thing to me, because we sit in dates and we hear people say things like, I don't know, I my ex-boyfriend was I don't know, he worked in finance, right? You hear a woman say her ex-boyfriend worked in finance, and suddenly, if you're feeling that like insecurity around finances and money and not being good enough, you hear that as like, she's telling me that my lowly job as a teacher or something isn't good enough,
Yeah.
and it's to spot that. So it's like, I'm seeing that I'm doing that. That feeling comes up, that emotion that comes with that
Yeah.
belief comes up. And then what do we start to do physically? I like to start with the physical. Like what
Yeah.
starts to happen physically? I want to start looking around, I recoil, I start to feel heavy, my energy starts to shift, my brain starts to go into thinking how I can impress her and stuff like that. And what I love to do with men is like, okay, when we spot these signs, it's like, come back to this moment. Come back
Mm,
to this moment, out of the story, out of the projection. Come back to this moment. Feel the
yeah.
ground. Feel yourself on the chair. Listen to the sounds of the room. Maybe when you're with this woman, this beautiful, incredible human being that you don't quite know fully yet. And remember that story is just a set of thoughts that can
Just
pass
the
by,
thoughts.
and
Yes.
you can come back to now, like come back to now and come back to the fact that this person's in front of you and you can be curious about who they are, not the assumptions that you're making.
Yes. I love this. We're so on the same page. And it's fascinating to me the more I work with my own self through meditation and practices and whatever to really get like how much we live in our minds, and that there's this whole other, the present moment, the being with someone, the curiosity, the fascination, the wonder, the playfulness, the creativity, right? It's like we shrink into this tiny little part of ourselves and then live as though that's reality or that's all of reality.
Yeah, yeah. We live our lives. So much of what we do is we live our lives through our minds. We live our lives through our thoughts, and and a news flash to some of them in there. You are not your thoughts. Your thoughts are not a trustable and credible view on reality.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Things that you think about yourself and you think about other people, you cannot like grasp onto those and go, because I think
That's
something about
uh-huh.
myself or other people, then that must be the truth. You just have these amalgamations of other people's voices, negative, often that
Yeah.
have kind of burrowed their way in like little burrowing animals
Yeah,
into
those
your
little
mind, and they're whispering in your ear.
yeah. I remember I wrote about this in my book that when I first got married years and years ago, I heard my mom's voice in my head
Mm.
as my own, right? About the things I was supposed to do or the ways my ex-husband was loading the dishwasher, all of these judgments. And I was like, oh my God, right? These are not even mine. I have a chapter that's called You're Not Who You Think You Are, and neither is your partner. And so, right, it's that way that we hear these thoughts and then we believe them, and then we have the emotional experience, or I don't know, some people vary what comes first. Um, but then we relate to someone else and to their thoughts about us, and it becomes this whole painful dance, right? As opposed to the beautiful dance, or the one where we're actually present together, we're engaging in so much more than our intellect.
Yeah, yeah, we are. I always say it's like there's two human beings
Yeah.
talking, right? But sitting between those two human beings is their judgments, their fears, their worries and concerns about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So they're never actually having a conversation. It's their fears, their worries, their judgments, and their negative past experiences that are
Wow.
interchanging. And we're always speaking through that, and it's always coming through that kind of I want another word for it, but I can't think of a great word for it. It's like this illusionary body that sits in
Yes.
front of each of us. And you see it sometimes really clearly. I do some work with couples and I take
Mm-hmm.
them through a particular communication tool, which is a Margot dialogue.
Oh yeah.
And I've
Yeah.
seen it before my eyes where one person says something like, I really appreciate that you cook so much food that's so beautiful and green and lovely. And the other person hears that and they'll say something in response like, oh, you don't appreciate me. You don't appreciate what I'm hearing you say is you don't appreciate X, Y, and Z. And I've sat there and been like, wow,
Wow. Right.
wow. I wish I've recorded it and I could play it back and I had them say it again. Can you say that thing again to your partner? And the partner's like, oh my God, all I could think about was that you were not valuing me as a person and a woman and you just saw me as
As a
a
cook or
housewife.
a housewife.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And that's all through their negative assumptions and beliefs they have about being a wife that came from
Yes.
viewing their parents and their mother and stuff like that. And most of the time, we do not know that this is how we're communicating with people.
Right.
And I think this is the number one reason why modern day is so difficult for people. Um, People will blame dating apps and all sorts of things, but I don't think it's that. I think it's the way in which we communicate and the way in
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
we just don't listen. We don't
No.
listen at like a deep fundamental level. We're
Yeah.
distracted. So we're listening from a superficial level. And then we're also so tied up in our thinking because our minds are racing a lot more.
Yes.
Um, and we just make so many assumptions about people
Yeah.
and it causes us misery.
Misery. And it's such powerful imagery to imagine. Okay, I'm sitting here. There's another person sitting in front of me. And actually, between us are sitting these illusionary or illusory bodies, as you're saying. And right through those fears, judgments, assumptions, all of that's actually what gets communicated back and forth. I love that image. It really clarifies what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so any other tips for as somebody starts to become aware, they notice, oh, look at that. I am now hearing, I now know, I can see and catch sometimes that I'm hearing through these fears, these judgments, these overlays, these things I've absorbed from my parents and our culture. What else do you support men with, or how to unravel that self-sabotage?
Yeah. It's to see also to see how that impacted them in the past. What's that created for you in the past? What's your habitual reaction to the sabotage as well? How do you then react when you see you've dissabotage, or if someone gives you the signals of I don't know, they're rejecting you, for instance? Like, how do you then react to that? A lot of men,
Yeah.
when they experience rejection, or the phantom of rejection, they assume rejection
Yeah.
is they go within themselves, they remove themselves, they shut down and so forth. So it's like, oh, you might not realize that you've done something, but you just see your reaction. You're like, oh, I'm in my reaction. Like, okay. And a question always I love to ask them is like, who is it that you want to be? Who do you really want to embody? What part of yourself do you want to show up with in your dating life? Like,
Yeah.
who's the man you want to embody? And sometimes we give it a name. Sometimes it just has traits and values. And it's like, step back into that person. Step back into being that person, right? That person
Yeah.
who is confident and doesn't collapse when they assume there's rejection, and actually stays curious and stays open-hearted and open-minded towards people.
Yeah.
It's like that process. And it's a bit like I say it's a meditation. I say life is like a meditation
That's what I was
because
just
we
thinking.
want to we all want to kind of stay on that road that we want to be on, or we want to stay focused to our breath. That's what we want to do. And then something distracts us, some fears, some worries and anxieties, and then suddenly we're off in our thoughts. And then we have to come back, and that's meditation. If anyone thinks, that's a lot of what meditation is, and not all meditations, right?
Right.
But this is life too. It's like there's a person that we want to show up with. There's a person that we want to be in our lives. There's a person, we know what that person looks like, how that person acts, how that person
Yeah.
speaks. And then we go into instances and things don't go the way perfectly we want them to. And then we collapse into our fears, our worries, our anxieties, our negative beliefs. And it's about then getting back on to the road that we want to be on and
Yeah.
showing up as that. And the more we practice falling off and getting back on, falling off and getting back on, the easier it becomes.
Yeah.
The easier it becomes.
Right. And I would say too, I love that because it's not like it becomes easier. I don't know if it ever becomes easy, but it's like I can watch, oh, look at the fear. Oh, I feel like my stomach is going to implode. I feel like some part of me feels like I'm going to die, right? It can be that intense where
Mm,
it's just implosion, explosion. And then to also, I made a commitment to myself years ago, like, I'm not going to speak until I can actually create more connection with my words rather than less. And so then all of that gets to just roil around and rah, or self implosion, whatever. And then it's like, oh, it's fascinating to be able to sit and cultivate that capacity to witness it rather than live as it or react from it.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah. So powerful. Do you have any examples of how this has happened in your own life or, moments that you've overcome?
Mm, yeah, yeah. So my relationship, I would say a number of years ago, there was a time when things were very turbulent, right? Very difficult. And I have uh my kind of, how do I say it? My default way of being is avoidant. Like
Mhm.
I'm of the avoidant family
You have
of
the avoidant
attachment
clan.
styles. Yeah, yeah. So my partner would get upset and cry and emote, and I would want to run,
Yeah.
right? I would want to run away.
Yeah.
And this was happening quite frequently at a point in our relationship. And what I learned to do was sit there and stay there
Yeah.
and just breathe. Right. So she might be crying about something. And I had all the thoughts in my head are like, you need to get out of here. You need to leave her. You need to end this. You need to go somewhere else. Like it would all be there. And I would observe all
They're
these thoughts and
fast and they're
all,
loud and they're, yeah.
oh man. And I'd be looking for like signals of her pointing out that that's what I should be doing. And I sat there and I breathed very deeply. And I would sit there sometimes for 5, 10, 50 minutes with her in front of her, facing her
Mhm.
as she
Mhm.
cried. And I would breathe and I would listen. I would breathe and I would listen. I would breathe and I would listen. And I'd feel the ground. And it would always come a point where she would stop and she would empty. She'd be empty.
Yeah.
She's emoted all the emotions she wanted. And then I would feel quite an intense charge in my body and my system. And at that point, I had various kind of meditative practices, embodiment practice to release that energy, or just to hold it while she was still with me and she was still in need of um my
Hair,
kind of
attention.
care.
Yeah.
Yeah, care and attention. And I learned that I had a capacity greater than I thought for
Mm.
difficult emotions,
Wow.
right? Because I didn't think I had that capacity to be with that. And I
Okay.
learned to have a capacity to not just breathe in those moments, but to also be able to like oh, I'm having these thoughts about this, but the man I want to show up with is this conscious and communicative and open and a heart open man. So instead of the thoughts would be there, but I'd also be aware of the man that I'm choosing to be. And I would listen and I would conversate with her and be like, hey, I love you. I know you're struggling. It's okay. Like, it's going to be okay. We're going to be
Mm.
okay. Like, and that's me. That's like a really, well evolved from where I used to be,
Yeah.
part of me. And it was like absolute medicine to the relationship and
Oh my
her.
God. I can feel it even now. It just warms my heart to feel, to feel how you're open when you said open-hearted, right? To be open-hearted in that moment when she's emoting, when she's confused, when she's struggling, when she's losing her shit or whatever, and to have you be in that steady place. Listening is beautiful, right? Sitting there listening and breathing is beautiful. And then even on top of that, to then be able to open your heart and, help her transmute it and digest it. And such beautiful intimacy there.
Yeah, yeah. And it kind of, as you say, that brings to mind something one of my clients I worked with. He his thing was defensiveness. If his
Uh-huh.
partner came to him and she criticized him in any way, his habitual reaction was defensiveness,
Yes.
right? And they'd been married for many years, and he did this. And over the course of time, we spoke and we went through various practices to help him. And he got to the point where she would criticize him, and he would stand there and he'd hear her,
Mm-hmm.
and he'd go, "Okay, so you're saying that that that. Like, tell me how does that feel for you?
Uh-huh.
Like, what would you prefer that I did?" And blah blah blah. And it's like one day he just kind of came to me. He's like, "Oh my God, I realized like she was really critical. She was really angry." And I stopped. I paused for a long period of time. I could see that I wanted to get defensive. I could feel in my body I wanted to get defensive. And then he's just like, I asked her some questions, and the questions were just questions of care and curiosity.
Yep.
And he said it just diffused the whole situation
Yeah.
straight, like in minutes, it was all
In
gone,
minutes.
right?
It's so different.
Mm, mm. And then he said she came to him and apologized. He was like, I was a bit harsh with what I said,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's
Which she would
amazing what
never
we
have
can
said if he
do.
was defensive, right? If he had
No,
fought back, there's no way she would have apologized and softened.
no, because we escalate, don't we? The
Yes.
defensiveness, then she gets into her reaction, and then the defensiveness comes back, and then we escalate, and then there's a big blow up.
Yes.
But through his bringing like just presence, awareness, and openness to the situation, it transformed the relationship. And it's the, we often think that to change relationships, there has to be like these big, profound moments.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not. It's just these
Mm-mm.
little tiny moments where we stay aware and we stay open and we listen and we are open-hearted and we are, relaxed in our nervous system. We are like down regulated and we can down regulate our partners. And that's what can transform a relationship.
Yes. It's so beautiful. It's well said too, right? We think it's got to be this major change, but one of those moments that would have caused a downward spiral and then it would have spiraled downward for days or months or whatever, right? To not go down, but to either to stay neutral or to even just have like a little uptick in
Mm,
connection. And then there's trust built, and then there's right the safety built, and then there's the intimacy built. And it's so powerful that one little moment can change so much.
yeah, totally.
Yeah. What can you say about the fear of rejection, right? That, even and this could be for dating or long-term relationship, but even in a long-term relationship, and I think sometimes it even gets scarier in a long-term relationship because this person is supposedly the bearer of your, ideally, this is not how men are taking it, but there's a lot of like, oh, I'm worthy if she says yes. I'm worthy if she wants to have sex with me, right? So we're working on separating that. Um, and how do you support men with that fear of being rejected and reaching out? I've had so many men talk to me about, okay, I'm laying there. I don't know if she wants to be intimate or sexual. Do I reach out? Do I not reach out? How do I reach out? Right. There's like this whole inner monologue happening. How do you support men with that?
Mm. And it's for us to see that like rejection for men is a very the fear of rejection is a very old thing that's in our lineages, right? Like if we go back to the times where we lived in savannas and we weren't in lovely homes and buildings, rejection from a woman or rejection in your tribe or your village meant death. You'd be ostracized from the town or the village, and you'd be wandering on the savannah in the jungle alone without food and so forth. So it's really understandable. You know, when we look at like primates and stuff, like if one of them's rejected from the troop, they
Yeah.
don't live very long.
No.
So that feeling is what a lot of us men feel is like, oh, I'm feeling this fear of rejection. It's just like to acknowledge like, oh yeah, this is what's there. And it's okay to feel as well, like because
Yeah.
the acceptance goes a long way. So we say it's okay to feel. And if it's inside of like dating, there's journaling you can do, there's conversation you can do. We can look at the logic of the mind and the assumptions that the mind is making and start to create a plan, right? I found with fear of rejection, especially in the dating sense, like creating a plan and taking small steps and putting yourself in the places where rejection may occur. Like
Mm.
one of my favorite things to do with clients, and this is to say men who are really afraid of approaching women, is to go to a place when there's a lot of women in, say a cafe or a bar. Cafes are good because you know they're pretty open spaces,
Yeah.
and just almost a journal how you would approach women that you see.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Just sit and just be like, okay, as a woman over there, she's on the table and she's drinking what looks like a latte. I'm not really one for coffee, so I don't know that much about coffee, but she's over there drinking a latte. Okay, like I see that she has this jacket that's really cool. It's got this lovely print on it. Oh, maybe I would go over and compliment her about that. Like, okay, breathe that. Feel it. Like, what does it feel like for you to go over there? What are the thoughts and the feelings you have about doing that?
Yeah.
What's the outcomes? What's the kind of assumed outcome you think is going to happen? Allow yourself to run through that mind and allow yourself to then go down the path of the outcome you would love to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And be with that and see what that feels like and breathe with that. And if just doing that starts to like shift and change the pathways in the brain. So if the man's experiencing that way, it's like start to small steps and plans. Now, if
Yeah.
it's a man who is in relationship and he maybe it's his partner, he's scared about sexual rejection, right? One of the things I often ask is like, what are your if you're scared of your female partner rejecting you sexually, the question I ask is what is your habitual way of initiating sex?
Mm.
What's your habitual way of initiating sex? What's the way you always go to 90% of the time you go to?
Yeah.
Right? Right. Okay. Now, this so we start thinking about changing this up because what her experience is you use the same way and it's boring. It's probably boring for her. Is this same way of habitually starting sex. That might be part of it. Sometimes with men, there's also the fear of rejection with their partners is that like they're afraid that if their partner rejects them, what it means about them. So we have to
Uh-huh.
look at the story.
Right.
Like, what's the story that you tell yourself about your worth and value, right? And do
Right.
that.
And then when you get rejected, it confirms that you shut down as opposed to being able to stay connected in that moment and make something different happen. Mm-hmm.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
And then one of the things I think often in relations people don't do enough is they don't talk to each other
Yeah.
about sex. They don't
Right.
talk about like how do I like to have sex? Like how do I like to be seduced and how do I like to be
Yeah.
approached for sex? Do I want someone to come and just my partner to come and say, "Hey, do you fancy having sex tonight?" or scheduling sex? Like what can you do in your relationship to create an environment where sex becomes something that becomes more and more comfortable?
Yeah.
So is that conversations about desire and wants sexually and so forth? Because often underneath the rejection is just like a fear of being with sex, being with the intensity of sex
Yep.
and so forth, or being pushed away or what it means. So it's like let's bring sex as a part of conversation that we can talk about more and more in healthy ways. And then even trying uh short intimacy games.
Mm.
Like the 3 minute game by Betty
Oh,
Martin
by
is a
Betty
great
Martin. I
example.
love that.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's a great game. It's like if you're scared of rejection, okay, you could also think about scheduling sex. Like I know
Yeah.
Esperel is really big on scheduling sex, and I am also. It's like, okay, talk to your partner. Would you be open to it? Like, suggest it in a way that doesn't make it sound like you're scheduling meetings. But the thing
Totally.
to remember, because people think about scheduling sex, right? We say, oh, let's schedule sex, and people are like, well, I don't want to schedule sex. Like that's going to make it boring and blah
Right.
blah blah. It's not going to be spontaneous. And here's the thing. Sex is never spontaneous,
Yeah.
right? I'm seeing this from Esther Perel. Sex is never spontaneous, right? Because someone's thinking about it.
Uh-huh. Interesting.
Someone's thinking, one of you's thinking about it. One of you is mildly planning it in your mind, right? So it's not spontaneous. It just feels
It just
spontaneous if you're
feels like
not the
it.
person thinking about it.
Right. That's amazing. Yeah, I love the intimacy games and the just playing with it and talking about sex outside of the bedroom. I mean, that's why I wrote my book, Honest Sex, is like, okay, how do we actually talk about this in an honest way? Because sometimes when there's a disconnect happening in a moment, we have to get outside that moment to see, well, how did that moment get created in the first place, right? What are the stories? What are our dynamics? If we're not actually communicating about anything, then sex is not going to be something that we're communicating about either. And so powerful. My partner and I actually have taken the Betty Martin 3 minute game and we started creating longer dates, like actually
Mm,
using some of those concepts. And so we're about to do date number 6. We turned it into 7 different dates where you get to explore, like, oh, what do I want to do to you? And what do you want to do to me? And what do I want to do for my own pleasure? What do I want to do for what do I think that you would like? And it's so powerful. I mean, we've had experiences that neither one of us could have even imagined would happen. And it's such a
mm,
powerful thing when you get over this idea that it's, weird to create a sex game or it's, not intimate to schedule sex. There's so much possibility and there's so much play that can happen and there's so much connection that gets created.
Because often if there's you're playing a game and there's rules, there's a level of safety we feel
Yes,
sexually
that's a
because
great
it's like,
point.
oh, I know the rules, I know the boundaries, like my system can relax
Yeah.
because it's clear how this is going to go, and I
Yeah.
can just follow with this, and I can let go of some of my performance fears or being good enough or knowing how to do things.
Right.
It can relaxes a lot of people.
Yeah. And while some people may think, oh, well, then, if there are rules, it's going to be confining. But what I often find is that the confinement opens up it's like, oh, a whole new dimension of the universe just opened up that I didn't even know was there because of that
Mm.
one rule that something else was either off the table or there was a certain way we were going to go about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We find sometimes with the, like you said, with the rules, it enables us to go to places we would have never normally gone to
Yes,
because it's not our habit to do so.
exactly. Exactly. Thank you so much. This has been a beautiful conversation and one I think is going to be really useful for men to check in and see, where are they relating from? Are they relating through their fears and through their assumptions? And how are they navigating those little moments of defensiveness or collapse? And um, yeah, so much good in here. Is there anything you want to leave men with? And how can
Mm.
men find more of you?
Yeah, yeah. I think on the leave men with, the world is really dying for men who are willing to show up with all of who they are while connected to groundedness and also deeply connected to the people that they're meeting and being with. Right? That's what the world is really dying for. When we things go wrong for us when we stop being connected to other people and we become ungrounded. So it's just like practice those capacities, practice those levels of communication, and things like dating and relationships become easier and easier. Never easy, but
No
easier.
easy way. Easier and easier.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And where can men find more of you?
Yeah, I'm very active on Instagram. You can find me at the authentic man underscore. That's the best way to kind of find me. And then, if you want to listen to more of what I have said for the last few years, you can find me on my podcast, which is The Authentic Man with David Chambers. I've been, recording. I think I'm into kind of like getting towards 300 episodes now. So yeah,
Awesome.
I've been
Great.
podcasting a long time.
Great. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being here. And thank you for the work you do with men and for your own commitment to your inner journey that makes that all possible.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and it gave you something to consider and explore in your life. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 to get a sense of how you can become a better lover and leader. You'll start to see how you can be both more respected and desired in your unique and genuine way. If you don't feel as confident or as excited about life or love as you'd like to be, this quiz is a really great starting point and will guide you toward a more passionate love life and a more inspiring and successful career. So again, text ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 or head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.